Hello everyone and welcome to this very special conversation. Former Australian Prime Minister Tony Abbott is here in India and he is a great admirer of culture and how India has become in these recent times. Prime Minister Abbott, really appreciate your time. Thank you for speaking to NDTV. You recently praised India's efforts, leadership efforts in sustainable food sources, particularly millets. How do you look at India's global positioning right now? And what role do you think India is playing and can play, particularly with relations and regards to the bilateral ties between India and Australia?
When I was Prime Minister, I frequently said that India was the world's emerging democratic superpower. I now think that India under Prime Minister Modi has well and truly emerged. It is the world's second democratic superpower. I think right now we very much need more democratic superpowers. And if there's any unpredictability in the American role, I think that it's important that India is an important bulwark of democracy, not just here in the subcontinent, but globally as well.
So are you of the opinion that given the nature of uncertainty, or should I say tension which exists between the Americans and Europeans, it is the Australians who can play that role, or are you of the opinion that it will be Prime Minister Modi who will be playing that role of bridging the gap?
Well, I think Prime Minister Modi cuts a pretty big figure on the world stage, and I think that should he choose to use it, he certainly could influence many things that are happening around the world right now. I'm certainly conscious of the fact that a couple of years ago at a conference with President Putin of Russia, he really took the Russian dictator to task for Putin's use of war as a national policy. And I thought that was a really fine thing for President Modi to say, particularly to President Putin's face. So look, I think India, as the world's most populous nation, as the world's fifth largest economy, as a country which has so much potential to, I think, substitute for China as a trusted part of global supply chains. I think India has great and growing influence, and I think it should use its influence for good.
And given the nature of developments which played out at the Oval Office yesterday, there is there is a lot of concern at one stage, and on the other hand, that there is that sense that perhaps Australia and New Zealand can come together and be a force to reckon with, something that they have been in the past.
Yeah. Well, Australia, I think, is a country that has more clout than we sometimes give ourselves credit for. If you look back in times past, Australia and New Zealand have been quite influential in world affairs, no doubt about that. As for what happened in the Oval Office over the last 24 hours, I think it's deeply regrettable. I do think that this deal between the Americans and the Ukrainians should go ahead. I hope it goes ahead at the earliest possible opportunity. I'd like to see an end to the war in Ukraine. I think we'd all like to see an end to the war in Ukraine, but it's got to be accompanied by serious security guarantees. Because let's never forget, this war started when Russia invaded. And if the war's going to stop, it can't stop in ways which give a victory to aggression. It just can't.
Since you say that what happened at the Oval Office was deeply regrettable, many are saying that perhaps the US President and President Zelensky could have ironed out differences before making it such a public spat. Do you think this is a new unfortunate chapter in diplomacy?
Well, if the minerals deal between the United States and Ukraine made sense 48 hours ago, it makes sense still. And the fact that there's been a rather tense exchange in the Oval Office shouldn't get in the way of something which is in the best interests of America, in the best interests of Ukraine, and ultimately in the best interests of peace.
Let's talk about India and Australia now, Mr. Abbott, and particularly keeping in mind your frequent visits to India. You visited Golden Temple. You have been talking about cultural exchanges and people-to-people relationship and giving a lot of impetus to it, emphasis on it. What do you think has changed in the last few years?
Well, I certainly think that at the political level, India and Australia are much more conscious of each other. Partly that's the Quad, partly that's the growing Indian diaspora in Australia, partly that's the fact that our trade and security ties are increasing. One of the more significant acts of the Morrison government was a very important India-Australia trade deal. It's been expressed as an interim deal, but frankly, just where it stands, it's a very good deal. And under this deal, India's exports to Australia have increased by 65% over the last couple of years. India's exports with the rest of the world have gone up by a pretty hefty 35%. But under this deal, India's exports to Australia have been increasing at twice the rate of India's exports to the wider world. And I think that India has the opportunity to be a much larger source of Australian exports of raw materials, particularly to feed the Make in India campaign of President Modi. And I think that India can substitute for China in our critical supply chains, because you know when you do a deal with India, you can trust India to honour it. But what we discovered a couple of years back with our China trade was that it could be turned on and off like a tap to suit the political interests or the strategic interests of the Chinese Communist government. So I think that the potential for vastly bigger two-way trade is there. Australia is also, I think, an important potential source of strategic minerals to India in the years and decades to come.
In terms of AI and newer technologies, where do you think are the potential areas of tie-ups?
Look, our university sector is very good at quantum computing and some of the other things associated with AI. I'd like to see further academic exchanges between India and Australia. Obviously, IT is one of India's great strengths, and I would like to see more Australian involvement in that sector.
And Mr. Abbott, opportunities do exist in strengthening the economic ties between India and Australia, particularly in innovation. India has been emphasizing a lot on innovation under Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Do you think these are newer areas of ties which the two countries must look at more favorably?
Well, the general point I'd make is that there's a kind of an ease and a comfort in the relationship between Australia and India, mostly because Australians and Indians seem to be very simpatico with each other, whether it's the prevalence of the English language here in India, whether it's our shared love for cricket, whether it's the fact that Australian and Indian soldiers have fought together on many battlefields over the last century. I just think there's an ease and comfort in the relationship between Australians and Indians, which we ought to build on, particularly given that India is a growing economic and high-tech powerhouse.
And what about the overall regional security? Do you think India and Australia can have a partnership which will ensure the larger regional security and stability in the Indo-Pacific?
Well, we know that the Quad is an informal partnership. but that doesn't mean that it's not a very important partnership. For instance, the Five Eyes partnership between America, Britain, Canada, Australia and New Zealand has probably been the most significant strategic partnership in the post-war world. I think the Quad has potential to be every bit as significant over time as the Five Eyes partnership, and certainly at the level of formal security cooperation. Over the last decade, it's been really developing enormously between Australia and India. India is beginning to participate in military exercises in Australia. Australia has recently been a routine and regular participant in the Malabar naval exercises that India runs. So again, the sky's the limit because of a shared interests and shared values and a shared commitment to democracy and the rule of law.
And shared love for cricket as well.
And that too.
Yes. My last question to you, sir. As someone who has expressed admiration for millets, did you get a chance to enjoy millets as well?
I did. I went to a lovely kind of showcase millet restaurant in one of the local markets, and I don't know the names of all the dishes that I had, but they were absolutely delicious. And my understanding is that millet can grow in areas which aren't suitable for wheat and rice. That millet is much less water intensive than wheat and rice, and that in many ways millet is a much healthier cereal than wheat and rice, particularly for people who are gluten intolerant. So it does seem like a bit of a wonder food. Obviously, Prime Minister Modi is very keen to promote it, and as a friend and admirer of Prime Minister Modi, I'm happy to be part of this campaign.
And when do we see you again in India?
Well, you will see me again for the Raisina Dialogue, which is just a couple of weeks off.
Thank you so much for speaking to NDTV.
Thank you.